America's war in Afghanistan may be over, some soldiers, veterans, and even civilians are still fighting.
That's right. They are trying to save the Afghans they say were forgotten after the U.S. evacuated. They argue that the chaotic withdrawal left interpreters to the fate of the Taliban, adding, quote, moral injury to what some see as a military failure. To talk more about this is staff writer for The Atlantic, George Packer. Hi, George. Thank you so much for joining us. And wow, what an incredible article you wrote there in The Atlantic. It was so comprehensive. I wish we could go through all of it. But you mentioned, one of the things that you mentioned in your article as part of the problem, right, because there were a lot of problems as we withdrew, were that these special immigrant visas created by Congress for Afghans who helped the U.S. were just not working as intended. The pipeline was just not working as intended. Can you tell us about how that program has progressed over the years?
It was established over a decade ago to bring Iraqi and Afghan interpreters and others working directly for the U.S. government and military out of danger and to this country. But it has never worked well. It's always been plagued by bureaucratic problems. No president ever came close to fulfilling all the quotas that were allowed by Congress. And then under the Trump administration, the program pretty much came to a halt, partly because of COVID, but partly because Trump and his advisors didn't want to see Afghan refugees coming into this country in large numbers. And so by the time Joe Biden announced the end of the war last April, there were 18,000 Afghans who had applied for this visa, plus tens of thousands of family members who were standing in a line that had pretty much come to a halt. At that point, Biden had a choice. He could either try to fix the program and slowly begin bringing people in with visas, hoping that Afghanistan would not fall to the Taliban for another year or two, or begin evacuations by airlift so that those people could be brought to safety before the Taliban took over. Biden and his advisors chose the first path, and it was a disaster because we saw what happened at the Kabul airport last August. We were not ready. The Afghans were desperately trying to get into the airport to be evacuated. We didn't know who they were, where they were, and the lucky few got out, and tens of thousands remain behind where they still are in danger in Afghanistan.
Yeah. George, you tell the story of a young man who really risked his life and had a great appreciation, starting off helping Canadians and then the United States. There are many people, as you point out in this article, that are like him. How are advocates helping people like him and other Afghans who they believe were unjustifiably left behind in Afghanistan? And what more at this point can be done to ensure their safety?
There are, as I said, tens of thousands who are still in Afghanistan, SIV applicants, but also women's activists, journalists, women who served in the Afghan military, who we've seemed to have forgotten about as a government. And instead, private citizens, mostly American, veterans and others, are doing it themselves and trying to organize private charter flights to pay the way of these Afghans out of danger. And they're getting almost no help from the U.S. government. In fact, often Homeland Security and the State Department are obstacles. So these advocates, including veterans, feel as if the government has moved on and forgotten about them and about the Afghans who they feel a debt of honor to bringing out. And so after a flurry of activity last August, when there were pictures of desperate people all over international media, it seems as if we've fallen back into the bureaucratic slumber that we were in before the fall of Kabul. And meanwhile, people in a desperate and cold and starving country are hiding out and looking for any way to escape. And right now, it seems all the exits have been blocked.
George, do you think there are enough advocates out there, though, that can make a difference? And based off of your reporting, when you put it out there like that?
I know people personally who are still working day and night and have been since last summer because they have names in their phones. They have texts coming in every day, hundreds of them, of desperate Afghans. And some of them they know personally from their service in Afghanistan. And these people are not going to forget about the Afghans who are sending out distress calls. But George, they can't do it. George, they can't do it without the U.S. government.
But just to push back just a little bit, what would you say to those people who would say, look, yes, of course, we owe a debt to Afghans who've been helping us, who've been interpreters, who are in danger of the Taliban, but we need some system in place to guarantee that, you know, these thousands of foreigners who are coming into the U.S. have been vetted in some way?
They can be vetted. They can be vetted on our military bases abroad, in Qatar, in Italy, the so-called lily pads, where they were initially flown last August. And they can be vetted in military bases on U.S. soil all around the country, which have been used for refugee admissions since August. So vetting is not the problem. The problem is bureaucratic and political will to actually unblock the exits and bring people out again who really are in danger and facing both death by the Taliban and also slow and cruel death by the crushing of the economy of Afghanistan and lack of food.
There's no doubt it's a humanitarian crisis, but of course you mentioned the political will, and you have been covering this story for 2 decades, and you've even interviewed President Biden about this, and you say he's a key to all of this because people who think that he would be open to letting all of these Afghans in quickly are wrong, correct?
Biden has a record that's a bit troubling to me that goes back to Vietnam when he was a first-term senator from Delaware and refused to vote to appropriate any money to evacuate South Vietnamese allies in the desperate last days before the fall of South Vietnam. That same kind of hardness toward appeals of a debt to these people has shown in the case of Afghanistan, which has repeated Vietnam in a kind of eerie way. It's as if Biden's sense of obligation and loyalty extends to the United States and to our troops and to those ties that he feels so strongly. But once you get beyond that, he kind of digs in. And there have been examples when journalists have asked him about this, not just me, but others. And he gets actually rather combative and says, we have zero responsibility. And so to me, that is where the problem lies, at the top. And his administration is following his lead.
George Packer, thank you so much. We really appreciate you joining us today.
My pleasure.